Oh shoot. Okay. So let me go. Thanks, Carlos. So Carlos in the comments let me know that I didn't have sound. So I'm going to start over really quick here, just because I was talking to a wall effectively because I didn't have the sound set up. So I'm using OBS, Open Broadcasting System, or something like that, to do this screencast, and this it's super powerful, but it's really easy to misconfigure it. So thanks, Carlos, for letting me know. All right, so I'm going to be demoing here a combination of using OnShape to do a workflow for the Glowforge. So I've been using Illustrator a lot for 2D things for the Glowforge, but I've been looking around quite a bit to find a good workflow for doing 3D things that can really work well in terms of doing like all the finger joints and stuff like that. Uh, and the thing that I found has worked best for me is this CAD program called OnShape. OnShape is web-based, which is really kind of wacky. When I started my career working on the browser, I worked on IE back in the day. I never imagined that we would be able to actually do this type of thing in the browser. And so what we're going to do is we're going to build a box, a tray type of thing, and that tray is going to look a little bit like this. So this is 1/8 inch-ish plywood. So I have my calipers out here. So if you're going to have one of these things, you really need a pair of calipers. So this one, 0.125. I think the stock that I had from before, 0.123-ish, right? So somewhere around there. So this is Baltic birch. This is Russian birch plywood. And you can buy it, or at least I buy it in Seattle at Crosscut Hardwoods in sheets that are 5 feet by 5 feet. I have them cut them down into like 20-inch strips, and then I have my table saw and I cut them down into 12 by 20 sheets that I'm using in the Glowforge. And yeah, and so we're going to do a box there. We're going to do it with OnShape. If you have any questions, please let me know. And then let me just rewind a little bit here, just because when I publish the recording here, I want to make sure that we have a good spot. And so I'm starting over here a little bit. And so if we go to OnShape, let me switch back to my, all right. If you go to onshape.com, it's all web-based, and it kind of follows the GitHub model a little bit, where if you're working for free, all the stuff that you do will be public. If you want to have private documents, private designs, then you got to pay for the professional plan. They also have an education plan. Your documents can be private, but they'll be marked for education, essentially, for the life of that document. And so this is their plan now. Create an account. It's pretty fast. When you create the account, you'll go ahead and you'll get a screen. You won't have some of the stuff here, but you'll have these things. You can go ahead and hit create document. I already created one here just a second ago called live stream, and so this is an empty document. And so the interesting thing is I'm using a Mac with a touchpad, so 2 fingers lets me move stuff around. Control 2 fingers lets me actually move stuff, or I can use the arrow keys to shift and arrow keys, or the arrow keys to rotate. Let's see, you can get all sorts of different views here with this stuff. You can do like, well, we don't have any geometry in there yet, so you can't see that stuff. And then you can hit stuff on the cube here to actually sort of get an idea of what's going on. And then there's also shortcut keys. If you do shift question mark, you can see all the shortcut keys. I'll call them out as I use them. But for the view, there's shift 1 gives you front, 2 gives you back, 3 gives you left, 4 gives you right, 5 gives you top, 6 gives you bottom, and then 7 gives you an isometric view. And then if you click on the corner here, it gives you a slightly offset. I think it's called a trimetric view. All right, so that's kind of how things work. Now, the fascinating thing about modern CAD programs like this, and the last time that I did any sort of CAD stuff was actually design stuff, was drafting in high school with like pencils and drafting tables and the whole thing. But this stuff is all parametric, which means that it essentially runs a constraint solver. And so you tell it, hey, I want to have geometry here. I want these things to be this far from this thing. And it essentially solves for that. And so that means that you can go back and then change those things and it can resolve. It's also non-destructive. So you'll see that as we build up our design, you'll see a list of steps that go on here. And you can go back at any point and actually edit stuff in that design. And then the other really fascinating thing about OnShape is that it actually lets you program OnShape with JavaScript to do extensions. And we're going to be using a couple of extensions that really improve the laser cutter workflow. So some really, really cool stuff going on there. So like I said, we're going to do a box. I'm thinking we're going to do like a little tray here. We'll do 6 inches square, or maybe no, let's do 6 inches by 8 inches by 3 inches. Okay, just so that we have some interesting stuff going on. And so the first thing you want to do, and the way this all works is that it all works via, you create a 2D sketch, and then once you have that sketch, you extrude it. And so that's how you create 3D shapes, and then you can do all sorts of different types of extrusions and joining stuff and Boolean math on stuff, and you'll see how you can sort of take simple sort of extrusions and build up more interesting things with it. But the first thing is that we're using that 1/8 inch stock, and so the first thing I want to do is I want to create a variable, which is going to be the thickness of our stock. I'm going to call that T, and then 0.123 inches. I found that that's been working well for me with this particular stock. And then hit the green checkbox to be able to do that. And then that's the only thing that we're going to need there. Now what we can do is we're going to hit this top thing here. You hit sketch. So now we're actually in sketch mode, which is a totally different mode. And you'll see that the toolbar here actually changed as we did that. And then if I press the N key, that says show me normal to the sketch. So let me repeat that again, because one of the things that we did here is I exited it out so I don't have my sketch anymore, is I selected a plane that I want to do the sketch on. So I want to do it on that essentially top plane there. And then I'm going to go ahead and create a sketch. And so now that sketch is aligned to that plane. And then I hit N to actually do the normal there. All right, so now we're in that mode. And this is going to be the bottom of our box. So we're going to start with the bottom of our box. And we're just going to let's do a center point rectangle. And so we're going to have this thing centered on the origin, and we're going to have a rectangle. And you can see I'm just sketching it. I'm not being super careful about making sure I get my dimensions right. Now I want to hit escape to go ahead and go out of that center point rectangle mode. And one of the things that you'll see here is that these lines are blue, which means that this is under constraint. I can still move stuff around freely. So we want to constrain this a little bit. Now, what did we say? We wanted our box to be maybe 8 inches by, what did I say? Let's do 8 inches by 5 inches, right? So now what I can do is if I hit the dimension tool here, so I can do that with that, or I can hit the D key, and then I click on this line. I can say I want this thing to be what do I say, like 5 inches wide, okay? And then I can use my pinch to zoom in and out, so I'm going to zoom out a little bit. Now I can, I'm still in the dimension tool here, and let's see if I can zoom in a little bit so that you all can see it. And there, so you can either do a dimension by selecting something and going like that, so that's one way I can do it. Or I can go through and you can select 2 points of reference, and then you can actually dimension between those. And so I said I wanted this to be 8. So there we go. So now we're at 5 inches by 8 inches. Now I'm working in inches here, which works okay. There's someplace here in this little hamburger menu, there's like workspace units. You can actually switch it to centimeters or millimeters or whatever works for you. Actually, where was I? I think it was a podcast I was listening to that was talking about the conversion of the world from traditional units to metric units. And a lot of shops in industry actually really resisted because it turned out that metric was actually harder to use when you're dealing with real machines. And the reason being is that a lot of times when you say, hey, I want to like reduce that by half, with the sort of, with the fractional sort of traditional system, it makes a ton of sense. With metric, obviously, nobody talks about 64ths when you're talking about metric. But I usually like a lot of the CAD import export stuff actually defaults to 1 unit equals 1 inch, and so working in inches tends to actually make the flow work better. It's not insurmountable, but it's something that I've been doing. Okay, so now we have this sketch here, and you can see I can actually go ahead and move this around, and I'm going to go ahead and do that. And then what I can do is I can select my sketch, and then I hit the extrude. All right, so there we go. And you want to do a blind extrude, and we want to do based on our depth, and I do that by doing the pound sign and then T. And you'll see that I'm extruding up. All right, and so when I mention those dimensions, those are going to be our outside dimensions, okay? If we wanted to do inside dimensions there, we'd have to do a little bit more work to be able to do that. So I have that, and now we have our first piece of material there. That's great. And now what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to create a new sketch for each face. But I'm going to start with the front face here. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a sketch, and you can create a sketch off of one of those planes, or you can create it off of a piece of geometry that already exists. And so I'm going to go ahead and create a sketch off of that front face. So I just did that, hit the N key, and then I'm going to draw a 2-pointed rectangle. And I'm drawing it purposely bigger than what I need because that makes it easier to select things later. And one of the things that I want to be able to do here is I'm going to be using more ways of actually specifying constraints. And so I'm going to be using, oh, I didn't want to create that thing. Okay, I'm going to create this thing called a coincident constraint, which means that I want this point to align to this other point, or I want this point to actually align up on this line. So there's ways to, you can actually say, constrain geometry. So I'm going to hit that, and then I'm going to say I want this point and this point here to line up. So there we go. And then I want to do the same thing here, this point and this point. If I can zoom in here. Let's see, sometimes it's a little bit, I don't even have to do the point to get it to work. All right, if I hit the backtick key, the tilde backtick key, then you can see it brings up a select other. And you can select a whole bunch of stuff, but this is actually a little bit tricky to actually figure out. So we're going to do vertex of extrude 1. Okay, so that, and so we can still look in 3D what's going on here. But there we go, there's our face. But you can see that I still have a blue thing here, which says that I haven't specified as much as I probably need to. So I'm going to hit the D key that takes me into dimension mode. And then, and you can move these labels around. And I'm going to hit this, and I'm going to say we wanted this to be 3 inches tall. Okay, so there we go. That's our front face, and then we're going to take that and we're going to extrude it. And again, we're going to extrude to a depth of T. And now what you see is that it's extruding out. Actually, there's a couple of things here. So it only took the piece of my face that I selected. I want to select this other thing. So I want these two to actually be coming out. And now there's two things here that are kind of wrong. So first of all, it's adding, which means that it's actually creating one piece of geometry between these two. But these are actually going to be two pieces in the laser cutter. So I want it to be new instead of add. So now you can see that it's actually a separate piece. It's a different color. And then it's actually putting this on the outside. I actually want to hit this arrow button to have it do the opposite direction. And now you can actually see that these two pieces are overlapping. And so the workflow that we're using here is that if you want two pieces to have a joint, you have to make sure that those two pieces overlap. So that's the front of our box. And you can go ahead and look at that there. And so now I'm going to do the same thing for all the other 3 sides. Now, I could use some other tools to mirror stuff around. In fact, I'll show you, but I'm going to leave the front as being different because we're going to customize the front a little bit. So now what I'm going to do here is I'm going to select this side here, and I'm going to do a new sketch. Press the N key to actually sort of create the normal here. Zoom out a little bit. Zoom controls are a little bit finicky. And then I'm going to create a rectangle here, just a simple rectangle. And then I'm going to do those coincident type of things. I want to have this point and this point line up, and then this point and that point line up. And then we're good to go. Hit the green check mark there. Now I take this, I want to extrude this. The depth is T. I want to do a new piece instead of augmenting a piece. And then I want to confirm that it's actually going in instead of out. So there we go. Oh, and then I want to make sure that I take both pieces of geometry so that I'm actually using the whole piece and not just the piece that sits above that. For any sort of enclosed surface on your sketch, including where it interfaces with other parts of your plane, you need to select things. So we'll go ahead and we'll do that. Okay. So there we go. That's that side there. And you can see every time I do this, I actually have another step here that's kind of interesting. And then I'm going to take this piece here and I'm going to mirror it. And then you can pick the mirror plane as this plane. And so we're essentially mirroring this across that sort of that center plane that we had there. And so that's an easy way to create a new piece. And then finally, we're going to do the back here. And so I'm going to select this sketch, N for normal, zoom out a little bit, draw my rectangle for that face, and then create a couple of constraints. I'm going to create a constraint from this to this, and then a constraint from here to here. There we go. Now we have that face. We'll extrude that. Pound T going in. I want to make sure that I select this piece too. And now I'm doing a new part. Okay, so there we go. Those are all of our parts. There's our box. And then we can go through and we can name these things. So I can go through and I can go, let's rename this one to bottom. We'll rename this one to... So these are all of our features, which are essentially the steps that we use to construct stuff. Let's see, we'll rename this to right. And then down here are the parts. These are essentially the individual pieces that we've created. Left. Right. Oh, I misspelled it. All right, so there we go. So that's pretty simple. Now, one of the things I wanted to do is I wanted to create sort of a little handle pull-out type of thing for the front here. And so let's go through, and what we're going to do is we're going to find that sketch here. So this is the sketch for the front. If I double-click on this, I start editing that. And let's go through, and what we're going to do is we're going to draw some lines here. So we're going to make the thing be like this kind of. Something like that is what I want to do. I hit escape to get out of that. And then what you'll see here is that I have a piece of geometry here, and then I have that. And I want to get rid of this line here, but I only have one big line going across this stuff. And so what I can do here is I'm going to hit the split, and I want to split here and here, and then I want to change this to the trim tool, and there we go. And now what I can do is I can drag these things oh, that's not what I want to do. I can drag these things around, and I can see sort of what's constrained and how it's constrained, and there you go. So now let's see. So we want to make sure that this is centered on my shape. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a point, and if I move around, it finds the center of that thing. So I have a point there, and then I want to do a coincident constraint that this thing lines up with my plane. All right, so now we know that that thing is actually centered. But we still haven't specified the size of this thing. So I can actually make it whatever size I want. So we need to create some dimensions there. So let's go through. I hit D for dimension. Let's make this be, I don't know, like 1 inch deep. And then let's make this be 2 inches wide. And that looks good. But you know what? Those are going to be some sharp corners. So what I can do here is I can actually say I want to put what's called a fillet. Is that way? I gotta select this point if it's not gonna. Why isn't it selecting that point for me? Since the current radius produces invalid geometry. Okay, we'll set the radius to 0.1. We'll see if we can select 0.1, 0.1. Why isn't this working? Oh, there we go. Now I got it. It doesn't want me to select that point. You know what? I think that those vertices, so let's go through, and if I select a point, and if I hit this, and I can actually get, so this is a little confusing. So I have these, and then I want these things to be coincident. I think I need that to be able to do the fillet. Why isn't that working? So sometimes this can be a little bit frustrating to actually select things. But what you can do is you can look at the constraints that we got going on here. And it's like we have a whole bunch of stuff going on. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to delete some of these constraints. All right, and then we're just going to say we want this point and this point to actually isn't that working? This thing's making me look bad here. There we go, and we'll say we want these things to be. Wait, why wouldn't that work? I don't know what's going on. Well, we definitely know that we want this thing to be horizontal, so there we go. And then this point here. Oh, and we have, what is this point doing up there? So we can now take this point. All right, and we definitely know that we want this to be vertical. So there we go, that's still free. And then we can go this point, and we want these to be coincident. There we go, boom. Okay, and now we can take this, and we can, yeah. There we go. Okay, so that's what we want. That took a little bit longer than we wanted it to. We can not show the constraints anymore. So one of the things also is that you'll see that like the same radius gets repeated here and here and here. One of the things that you can do is that you can actually take that off, and then you can dimension. Let's see, that you can actually say that I want this and this to be equal. And so that's that way. And when you use the fillet tool, by default, when you start clicking around, it actually does that. But if you somehow lose it, now those things are all equal. And so I can change this to say 0.2, and then all of those will change to be 0.2. So let's go ahead and leave it like that. Okay, so there we go. And there's our box. Oh, you know what? Our sides got messed up. And it looks like this sketch here. So what happens is that I ended up deleting some of the geometry that that one of the sketches actually referenced, and so my shape ended up getting a little bit confused after that. And so this sketch is confused, and this one here is confused also. So we'll go ahead and we'll look at that, and let's just go ahead and we'll go ahead and remake this because it's really confused. Okay, so go ahead and do that, and then we want this to be coincident with that, this to be coincident with that. Hit OK, and then our extrude no longer knows what it's talking about. So we'll go ahead and say we want this and this. So that looks good. And then our mirror is, why did our mirror break? There we go. We create those parts. And then this sketch here is confused also. That's a busted constraint. We can go ahead and move that. And then I is the coincident constraint. We can do that to that. And there we are. We're off to the races. Okay, that was more complicated than it should have been. But now we have a box. There we go. So there's our box. Now, this is pretty good, but I mean, this hasn't really saved us that much work versus sort of like measuring this stuff out in something like Illustrator. So the next thing I'm going to use is I'm going to use a plugin called Laser Joint. And so you do that by, and this, sometimes this may be a drop-down menu, sometimes it actually, depending on the size of your screen, it may actually be bigger. So you do this by doing the Add Custom Features here, and then you can search for this one, and this one's called Laser Joint. And you can see that there's a whole bunch of these things that are called, you want to find the one that actually has the version next to it, because a lot of these are like copies of like other stuff that people have done. This is called Feature Script for OnShape. And so you can copy other people's stuff and then modify and work with it yourself and then republish it. They don't have a good sort of origin tracking thing, like sort of like GitHub has like repos and then forks of repos, and when you do search, the fork obviously shouldn't show up before the original thing that it's forked from, or at least like 99% of the time. They haven't done a great job here, so you want to search for the thing that actually has the v3 here, at least for the laser script thing. So that's the one that we're going to be going with, and I already have it installed here. And so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to actually say I want to run this, and then I'm going to put it in automatic mode here, and ideally, you would be able to select all of our parts and it would just go ahead and make itself work. But through trial and error, I figured out that you actually want to use this thing in 2 different steps. And so I'll show you what they are. So let's choose the front part, the bottom, and the back. And then we're going to actually go through and you'll see that it live previews the sort of pins that it's actually dealing with. And so you can actually then go say the adaptive pin sizing I want. It says I want pins between anywhere between 1/4 inch and 1 inch. And then by default, I want 3 pins. And you can sort of like separate out what it is. Now, I like to have the front faces actually have a actually not have any of the tenons coming out in the front. So if you look at this, you see how this face, I would consider this the front because both of these corners are actually sort of the true dimensions. Whereas if you look here, you can see that both of these corners here are actually inset for this face. And so I consider this the front face, and I would consider this a side face. And so that's the front face there. And so we're doing those things. You can change them. You can play around with this stuff. We can go like, let's go to like 4 pins, something like that. And you can also play with some of the other options here, but I found that I really don't need to. So I'll go ahead and hit OK there. And then I want to do the laser joint again. And now I want to do automatic again. And now I want to select all of my parts. And that'll do the rest of them. And if I do that, then my front and my back end up essentially being mirrors of each other, and then the sides are mirrors of each other also. So that's great. So that's actually looking pretty good. Like that saved us a lot of work, that script. And what you'll notice that those show up as features over here also, just like some of the other features that we had. And so super, super cool there. Now the next thing I want to do is I'm going to use another one called kerf compensation. And what this does is this expands the size of the pieces just a little bit to account for the width of the laser. And so the kerf is the term for the amount of material taken out when you're doing a cut. And so if you're doing like a table saw blade, your kerf might be, you know, 1/10 of an inch, right? But with the laser, it ends up being somewhere with the Glowforge, you know, 0.001, 0.008, something like that on this wood. And so what you can do here is that you can say, I want to take all the pieces that are my thickness, and I want to do a kerf allowance of 0.01 inches of my kerf. And so that went through, and now if I zoom in here, what you can see is that these pieces now are a little bit bigger than they were before. You can especially see it if I go into the translucent view, right? You can see that things are overlapping in a way that they did before. Now, what I found is that when I'm building boxes like this, if I don't do the kerf adjustment, then things fit, and they fit pretty loosely, and I need glue to be able to hold the whole thing together. If I do the kerf adjustment, then I can go through and actually friction fit, and these boxes end up being pretty solid. Like this one here is friction fit. There's no glue used on this. You can glue it also, but I find that works really, really well. So that is the kerf compensation. So if we go through and if I do add kerf compensation, you can see that this is version 2 is the one that I'm using there. And then the last one is, I believe, is this one called auto layout. And if I go ahead and if I do that, what I can do is it finds all the pieces that are that thickness, and then my cut sheet width is like 11 by 20 inches is roughly what that is. And it goes through and it actually creates all of these things. Oh, spacing is 0.1 inches. It lays these things out on a sheet. And so this makes it really, really easy to actually print this out, because you can do this by selecting each one of the faces and exporting it, or you can use something like this, and this actually ends up working really well. Now, one thing I do want to warn you about is this doesn't actually keep track of what is sort of front-facing versus back-facing, and so if you have pieces that are directional, you may want to go ahead and flip them depending on how things work, if you actually have sort of a nice face and a not so nice face to your laser, because you'll to your material, and you'll notice that if you're not using masking, you'll definitely get some charring on the bottom depending on your power settings. That looks different from the amount of sort of, you know, from what things look like on the front. So something to keep in mind there. So now we're pretty much done with sort of the layout side of things. And this, and I can rename these parts also. So, and then I can go through and with the auto layout here, if I hit suppress there, then it actually pretends like that step isn't there. And then I can go through and I can rename this one. This was right. Wait, no. Confused. Okay, this one's back for sure. That's right. And then this one is left. Okay. Back, left, right, front, bottom. Okay, great. So now I'm going to go through and I'll unsuppress this. And there we go. Now, the next step is we need to export this in a way that we can actually use it with the Glowforge. Now, a lot of CAD programs actually have a CAM mode that goes with it. So CAD, computer-aided design, CAM, computer-aided manufacturing. And that actually goes through and can essentially plan out the path of the laser in excruciating detail and generate this thing called G code, and then use the G code to actually drive your laser. And so that's a common pattern if you're using more traditional tools like CNC mills or like cheaper laser cutters, things like that. The Glowforge is much simpler. You want to upload SVG. So what we essentially want to do is take this thing and convert this into SVG so that we can go ahead and upload it to the Glowforge app. I haven't found a really great SVG export out of OnShape, and some of the other CAD tools that do have sort of a CAM mode, they might have ways to export things in an easier way, but I haven't found them to have the easy sort of feature script type of thing that let me do things like the finger joints that we have here. So we end up with a mix. The easiest way I've found to actually do this is that we're going to go ahead and we're going to create a drawing. And so this is essentially as if we were going to sort of like print this out or send it to somebody. Do custom templates. Let's see, we can do no border, do not include, and then the size of this, let's see, I think we want to do, like, it doesn't really matter because of the way that we're going to do this, but I think we'll do a B size. I'm trying to remember what these sizes mean. And then hit OK. And then what we want to do here is now we can go through and you can select, we want to insert view. Let's see. And I think there was a way to essentially, oh, and if I select that thing, that essentially grabs the whole thing. And I don't want the front, I want the top view. And there we go. Okay, the B sheet is obviously bigger than we want. So there we go. There is our, and then hit escape here, and there's a drawing with no other futzy stuff around it of our shape. Let's see, if I go to sheets here and I hit properties, okay, I want to change the scale to 1 by 1. Okay, there we go. And then I can do custom, and we want to do the width is 11, we'll do 20 by 11. Okay, so there we go. Now we're cooking. And this doesn't fit on the thing, and I'm sure I could find a way to like rotate this because the way that it, like, one does portrait, the other one does. Actually, if we go back here, let's see it. When we do the auto layout, and here, if we do width is 20, and then height is 11. And then we go to the drawing, and then if you hit this thing says resync things. Boom, look at that. All right, there we go. So now here's our drawing. That's great. That's exactly what we want. And now I can go through here and I can export this. And so you can export this as a PDF if you want. But it turns out that what I like to do is actually send this through Illustrator once before I go ahead and print it and use Illustrator to generate the SVG. So I'm going to go ahead and save this as a DXF, hit export. This actually goes through, you can't see it on the screen there. Let me go through and do this. It creates, you can see I have 6 of these sitting in my, and then I'll go through and I'll import this into Illustrator, and here you can see the scale is 1 unit equals 1 inch. Because I did everything in inches along the way, we should be good to go. I'm going to go ahead and hit OK here. And look at that. That actually looks pretty good. Now, one of the things that you'll see here with, and this is really just sort of a limitation of the DXF file format, is each of these things is individual paths. And so they're not joined together into shapes. And so at some point, I'll probably write some code that's like a DXF to SVG converter that fixes some of this stuff up for you. I haven't had time to do that. So what you do is you select the shape here, and you do Command J, which now joins that into one shape. Now, if you have cutouts, you want to make sure that you do the cutouts first and you don't include the cutouts in the larger shape. If you end up doing that, sometimes Illustrator gets confused. You don't want to create a shape like that. And if I do something like that, you'll see that like, oh, I didn't catch these ones on the side here. Let me zoom in. And you can see, let's see, if I accidentally grab too much, I can go ahead and shift select this and then J. Okay. And then let's do this one. So Command J for each of those, and oh, got too many there. All right, so there we go. That's our cutout. So now we export this as SVG. Command Option E brings up the export. I'm gonna export this to my downloads, and then it's just going to be called Artboard 1, whatever. Export Artboard. Okay. So now in my downloads here, we see we have this. If I go ahead and open this with, say, Chrome, Chrome knows how to render that SVG. So that's actually looking pretty good. And now let's go over to the Glowforge app. We're finally there. And I'm going to upload downloads. Oh, wait, no, that's the wrong one. Oh, wait, it had a prefix thing. Okay, this is the right one. It had a prefix thing. You can see I have nothing in my Glowforge right now. So now instead of pointing the camera at me, I'm going to point the camera at the Glowforge, and we can actually see this thing work. So you'll have to excuse me while I adjust this. Let's see, I think my cord reaches here. Adjust my tripod here. Sorry about that, everybody. All right. Let's see. How's that look? Not great yet. We're working on it. Thread the camera through a tangle of wires here. Guess I'll have to be patient with me here. And you guys can see what a mess my office is. It's kind of a disaster. Should have done this before I started broadcasting. All right, so there we go. Oh, and I actually had other views set up. There we go. Okay. So now, let me take a sheet of the plywood here. Now I found that this stuff actually warps a little bit. It's a little bit warped, so it's not laying. Actually, this one's laying pretty flat. If it doesn't lay flat, then I have some of these like strong magnets that I can use to actually weigh down the corners, which is usually good enough to actually keep this stuff working well. And then what you'll see is, and hopefully y'all can hear me here. Okay, yeah, I see the audio input is working fine. What you'll see is that it takes a picture and actually shows it here. And now I know that for I have a Glowforge Pro, I know that about 180 at full power is going to be enough to actually make this work. And these sheets cost me about $1. So that 5 by 5 foot sheet of plywood that I cut down costs about 15, 16 bucks. So it's really inexpensive to do this stuff. So now I hit the print button there, and you'll see that the Glowforge is moving and sort of measuring the thickness of the material. Now what I'm going to do also is I'm going to open a window and vent the thing. I have a dryer tube coming out of it, and I have a little insert that I can put in the window to be able to do that. So there we go. So yeah, so here is just so you can see what I have set up here is it comes out of the back of the Glowforge, and then I have a little insert that I can put in the window so that I don't freeze while I'm doing this. And so we'll go ahead and hit the button, and it will go. So this is actually pretty quick here. Now, one of the other things I could have done, obviously, is use Illustrator to create a design or create something that I wanted to etch into that. I didn't want to take the time to do that, but you can use the output of OnShape as a starting point for doing something fancier too. And obviously the etching takes quite a bit longer to print, so I didn't want to have everybody sitting around watching that go. And if you all have questions, go ahead and ask them in the chat, and I'll answer them if I can. Now, when I got this thing, I thought I was going to have to put it in the garage. But after measuring, I found it really fit in my tiny little office here pretty well, which I was super happy about. The only tricky thing was venting it. Luckily, I have a window here. It was a little bit further away than so the original Glowforge hose, the dryer hose that came with it, didn't quite work. So I had to go out and get my own dryer hose. And then I got tired of having an open window, as we get towards the Seattle winter. So I got a sort of, flange type thing and took some of the stock before I cut it down and was able to make something to actually stick in the window. So now I'm not freezing my butt off as this works. All right, there we go. If we give it a second, it should turn off. And so let's open this up. And there is the waste piece. And here are all the various pieces. And because we did it in the order that I specified, these two are exact mirrors of each other. Here's our front and our back, and then our bottom. So let's go ahead and put those together. So let me move the camera around some more, and hopefully that this will work. Again, my completely disorganized desk. I was going to clean it up today, but now I'm doing this instead. So one of the things I went out and got was a rubber mallet with, well, no, it's not rubber. It's essentially hard plastic. I don't know. This was like, what's this called? A double-face soft hammer. So it won't necessarily mar wood, but it's not like it's totally rubber. So the way that I'm still getting used to these things. So I'm going to take the bottom, and I want the nice face of the bottom facing out. And you can see there's some burn marks going on there. And then let me go ahead and switch that to full screen. There we go. This will work. All right, so there, I'm going to do that. And now let's do the front first. So I'll take this, and you'll see that these things kind of almost just barely fit. So if I go ahead and give it a tap, it starts to actually make its way in there. So that's the friction fit that I'm talking about. So that's the front on there. So now let's do a side. So you could probably use a piece of scrap wood and a regular hammer to do this also. You can kind of hear the wood squeak as you hammer it in. This last piece is a little tricky. Take a look at it and make sure all the joints are tight. All right, and there we go. That is a completed box with dimensions, what did we say? We were doing 5 inches by 3 inches by 8 inches. And no glue used there. And, you know, if I pulled really hard, I'm sure I could take it apart. But this thing it feels pretty darn solid. So we'll go ahead and move the camera back over. All right. Well, hopefully, you know, I see I have some folks watching. Hopefully, everybody found this interesting. If you have more questions, go ahead and reach out to me on Twitter. I'm JBeta at Twitter, at JBeta on Twitter, or leave comments here, and I'll try and respond to them as I have time. And if you have sort of more ideas or pointers or things that you think I can do better here, I'd love to hear about it. But I know that at least when I got my Glowforge, I struggled a little bit finding a really good workflow. And I figured just seeing somebody do it end to end would be useful for a lot of folks. So hopefully let me know what you think. And I'll talk to you all later. Bye.